Hey, my little sea cucumbers. I'm back today for day 2, and I've got a weird question for you today, which is, what do you find unforgivable? What do you find unforgivable? I've been sitting with this idea of forgiveness. So weird. This place I am in life, I left religion. I went through full-on nihilism, atheism, and I'm at this really weird and wonderful place where I am reintegrating some of these concepts that I first learned about in a religious context. And now I'm learning them in a more embodied context, and they mean so much more to me here. But this concept of forgiveness is one that I've been sitting with a lot lately. And I've got this theory. This probably stems from, I've done a lot of work with internal family systems, and Richard Schwartz has a book called No Bad Parts. And the idea in internal family systems, if you're not familiar, is that we are made up of all of these pieces that sometimes want different things or have different motivations or are carrying different traumas or burdens or parts of us that we've exiled. And it's almost like we're made up of all these mini pieces and personalities. And in Richard Schwartz's work, he talks about how none of these pieces of us are bad. They just carry different burdens. And when we see someone outside of us, whether it be a spouse or a neighbor or a politician or somebody random that you run into at the grocery store, when we're interacting with these people outside of us that trigger things in us, a lot of times always, they're triggering parts of us that we in some way have cut ourselves off from, if that makes sense. And so I've been thinking of forgiveness this week as a inner work concept. So like when we're getting triggered from people outside of us, that means that there's something inside of us that we cannot accept about ourselves. So if there's something in someone outside of us that we cannot forgive, what that means is that we think that if we did that thing, we would be bad. We couldn't accept ourselves that way. And so whether we're doing the practice of internal forgiveness or external forgiveness, we're doing some incredible alchemy and healing work where we're turning separation into oneness. And instead of saying, no, you are different from me, you are other, I'm othering you, we all of a sudden learn empathy and we can see the humanity in another person because we can accept that we also have that thing in us. So for example, I think about this a lot. When my kids were little, I used to have this really ingrained fear that I would leave them in the car and that they would die. Sorry to go really dark here. Sometimes that's what I do. I used to have this really deep fear of that happening. And I remember one time finding out about someone who that did happen to them, and which is just the most devastating thing I can imagine. And I remember being really shocked at the kind of language that was being used around this person who just lost their child and who probably was already crucifying themselves with guilt and remorse and grief. And I remember seeing all of these really hateful comments when the news article came out where people were saying, she's such a horrible mother. I would never do that. I would never leave my kid in the car. I sat with that because to me, I'm like, here's this mother who's got to be just going through hell. And then there's all of these people who are angry at her and are piling more guilt and shame. Why? Why would you do that to someone? And the answer that I have come to is that it's because of fear. We all carry these fears of being bad or of doing something that hurts someone that we love, that when we see that behavior in other people, we judge it. We judge it because we want to other it. We could not accept that in ourselves. Whereas really what love looks like is saying, oh my gosh, I'm scared of doing that too. I'm human. I could totally have made that mistake. That could be me. And instead of pushing away these people and things that scare us, we bring them closer and we love them and we empathize and we forgive them for being human. And in the act of forgiving other people, we're also forgiving ourselves. I have this thing that happened to me. I think it was last year. I was going on a walk and then I was walking around my neighborhood, and this is going to make me look judgmental, which I guess is fair. I can forgive myself for being judgmental. But I was walking around the neighborhood and I was just looking at things that I thought were wrong. How much water people were using on their grass, or how much money people had spent on certain things, and making up all these stories about who these people were that I don't even know, who had beautiful houses and beautiful yards. But I had stacked up these really rigid values for myself and really rigid rules of things I couldn't accept about me. This is something I've been working on forgetting in myself and others. But anyways, I was on this walk, this really judgy walk. I was feeling miserable, just feeling like humans are horrible and look at all these horrible things that we've done. And then I heard this voice in my head that said, it's safe not to judge. And I thought it was so weird that the words safe and judgment were associated together in that sentence that it made me really stop and think, like, it's safe not to judge? Am I judging because I don't feel safe? And immediately the answer was, yes, that is why we judge. We judge because we're afraid. We're afraid of being attached to that kind of behavior or being perceived in a certain kind of way. We're afraid of it. And I'm trying to figure out how to tie all this together, because it all ties together. So when we can let go of our judgment, when we can embrace this idea that we talked about in the last podcast, where we are all basically good because we exist, and we're all basically good. If we can really believe that about ourselves and each other, if we can really lean into this idea of we don't need to judge, we don't need to separate ourselves from what we like and what we don't like, we can embrace that it's all, everything we see outside of us is a reflection of something in us. And can we forgive that? And can we come to a place where even when there are things outside of us that we don't like, that doesn't make people bad? Does anything I'm making make sense? This is the kind of stuff that I've just been pondering on for the last few weeks. This idea of everything outside of me is also in me, but I'm not sure it translates. I'm going to keep talking about it because I want it to make sense out here as much as it's starting to make sense inside of me. But I want to end this little short episode by asking again, what is it that you feel like you can't forgive, and why? And what is it in you? What does that mean about how much you're able to love yourself? Yeah, I love you. You're everything. Bye.